Hi, I'm Ian, and this is the walkthrough video for the Week 3 Prove assignment. This, of course, is just a milestone for the meal price calculator. So most of what we need to do is already done here. If you watch the intro video, this is where the existing code comes from, but I'll go over what we have so far already. So let's take a look at the actual milestone requirements. First, ask user for the price of a child and adult meal and store these values properly into variables as floating point numbers. So first we have a variable for the price of a child's meal, and in order to get that, we are prompting the user, what is the price of a child's meal, with the input function. Now the input function will give us a string containing whatever the user typed in. Then this function, the float function, will take that string and turn it into a floating point number, assuming that it's a floating point number. If you type in something that isn't a number, it'll crash, but we're not going to worry about that for now. So then that number, now that it's been turned into a floating point number, gets stored into our variable. So that's what this is. These are just comments showing the other variables that we need to ask the user for and get that information. So the next would be the price of an adult meal. We can just copy what we have for the price of a child's meal and then just change the prompt so that the user knows what we're asking for. What is the price of an adult's meal? Next, we need to know how many children there are, as well as how many adults there are. And those will be integers instead of floating point numbers, since you can't really have a quarter of a person ordering a meal. So instead of using the float conversion function, we'll just use the integer. We can still just use the input function to get a string from the user that will convert into an integer. So we can just change the prompt on this as well. How many children are there? And then we can do the same thing for adult count. How many adults are there? So that's milestone 1, to get the child and adult meal prices and store them as floating point numbers, as well as milestone requirement 2, which is to ask the user for the number of adults and number of children and store those values properly into variables as integers. Requirement 3, ask the user for the sales tax rate, store that as a float. We know how to do that. It's the same as the first two, just change the prompt. So the user knows to type in the tax rate. What is the sales tax rate in percent? And then I'll just put a percent sign there so it's more obvious when they start typing that it's a percentage. So then going back to the requirements, all that's left is the last one, but this is kind of broken into two parts. The first part is compute the subtotal, and the second part is display the subtotal. And then this just says we can make it pretty next week, so don't worry about that. But as far as how to compute the subtotal, we actually get told that right here. Determine the meal's subtotal by multiplying the number of children by the price of their meal and multiplying the number of adults by the price of their meal and adding those two values together. So instead of some arbitrary random number 1, 2, 3, we're actually going to compute the subtotal now. So the subtotal will be the amount of children multiplied by the price of a child's meal. And then we'll add that to the amount of adults multiplied by the price of an adult's meal. So just like in math, just like in algebra, there is order of operations. So these numbers will get multiplied and these numbers will get multiplied first, and then the results of those two multiplications will get added together. Since addition comes after multiplication in the order of operations. So if you want to be absolutely sure, you can always use parentheses, but in this case, the parentheses are not necessary to make sure that everything happens in order. So then the last part of the milestone requirements is to display the subtotal, but we're already doing that. So you can see down here, I actually already did a test run. We're just going to ignore that. And we're going to do a new test run. So what is the price of a child's meal? $2. What is the price of an adult's meal? $8. How many children are there? We can say that there are 3 children. How many adults are there? 2 adults. What's the sales tax rate in percent? 0, because right now it doesn't matter. Nowhere in our calculation does it have anything to do with the sales tax, but it will next week, so this is still important. But we can put 0 because it doesn't do anything right now. The subtotal is $22. So let's just check that by hand to make sure that the math is all correct. If we have 3 children, each with a $2 meal, then that is $6. And we'll add that to our 2 adults that each have an $8 meal, which is 16. 6 plus 16 is 22. So our total here is correct. This is really all you need to do for the milestone. And I hope this was helpful. If there's anything you have questions about, whether it is order of operations, just doing math in Python, or converting input into different types, go ahead and ask your TAs, ask your professor, and they'll help you out. There are plenty of tools to help all of you succeed in this class. So keep up the good work and see you next week.